Hey everyone, it's Brandan Robertson here, and welcome to Nomad Live. Today I am here at the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with Father Richard Rohr. And as many of you have known, that as you watched my Facebook page over the past few days, I've had a lot of questions and comments about the current political climate that we're in, and how to respond to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I've talked about non-dual thinking, and many of you have raised a point of what do we do in this situation when we're supposed to believe that things aren't as black and white as they seem, and when we're not supposed to scapegoat those that we disagree with. How do we then respond to a person like Donald Trump, or even Hillary Clinton if you're on the other side and disagree? And I've admitted that this has been a very difficult and perplexing question to answer for me. And so today I wanted to come and talk to Father Richard Rohr about this, and to kind of get inside his mind and understanding of how do we respond in the midst of our current political climate. And so I'm excited to have you guys with us, and thank you for being with us.
I'm happy to be here. Well, I'll say a few things. I hope they're apropos and helpful to you. We're here in a little hermitage where Brandan has been praying and reading and studying and journaling all day. So he's filled with good energy. I hope I can bring some good energy. Let me start with this. You know, I teach here at our center the contemplative mind. And if you want a real clear descriptor of what we mean by the contemplative or mystical mind, the words are used differently, it's that they think non-dually. They don't see either or, they don't see in terms of all or nothing thinking. It's both and thinking. It's not win-lose thinking, it's win-win thinking. Now, that's the way the saints approached life. That's why they could love their enemies. That's why they could overlook offenses. That's why they could understand the Sermon on the Mount, which most of Christianity didn't even have the proper software to know how to read such a thing as the Sermon on the Mount. Now, so when you hear someone like Brandan or myself teach non-dual thinking, you naturally think that our response to everything should be, well, it's wonderful, everything is good, that it's almost a refusal to see the bad side. Actually, that's not true at all. I would say non-dual thinking, which is the highest level, you can only get to it by first going through the problems, the irritants, the dilemmas, the paradoxes of dualistic thinking. And we see this very clearly in Jesus, you know. I mean, he doesn't mince any words with the scribes and the Pharisees. I would be afraid, frankly, to call someone a whited sepulcher, you know. He does. So you've got to start with dualistic thinking. In other words, if I teach anything other than that, I'd be dualistic. I've got to say both dualistic and non-dual are necessary and good. It's simply that dualistic thinking, either or thinking, doesn't prepare you to deal with love, with suffering, with death, with any real notion of God or eternity. You need to put on, as the nuns used to tell me, a different thinking cap. So first, you have to say, this is real, this is unreal. This is life, this is death. This is good, this is bad. No? It's not being naive, which some people think it is. Then you put on your mystical contemplative mind and say, well, the energy with which I say that is not hateful, is not accusatory per se. So let me add one little thing before I shut up and let you take over again. I'm glad you used the word scapegoating. So I am a student of Rene Girard. See the cross of Jesus as Jesus becoming the scapegoat to reveal the lie of scapegoating. Don't do this. This is what it ends up with. But let me make this point, and listen closely if you can. Right? Scapegoating is precisely an unconscious mechanism. You don't know you're doing it. You really do think Trump is the devil incarnate, to use the current. and you project all your own darkness and your own anxiety, your own fear onto him. We're not talking about scapegoating when we're talking about conscious, prayerful discernment, where I look at the scriptures, I look at what the saints and the mystics said, and I say, you know, this is not good. This is not right. So you actually can speak truth to power once you've attained the mystical or contemplative mind with greater clarity and in some ways with greater firmness. Because you know it's not just your opinion. It's not, you're not operating out of some knee-jerk, unconscious hate reaction, but you're saying this is good, this is bad. Again, we see Jesus do this with you cannot serve God and mammon, or the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. Jesus can be very dualistic, but then his response to that is always a non-violent, merciful, forgiving, inclusive one. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So I got to say my whole piece in 5 minutes. Thank you.
I love it. No, it's so good. Except I hear, so there's this critique, is that when we're in functioning with the contemplative mind,
Yes.
it almost seems that there's two versions of theology that are in conflict with one another. Liberation theology and then the contemplative theology. And I know that they don't have to be. That's kind of the whole purpose of the center.
That's our purpose, exactly.
However, mystics and those who are in contemplative traditions tend to emphasize that non-dualistic, non-judgmental, it all is what it is.
It is good. Everything belongs.
Yeah.
As I say, yeah.
And then the liberation side really emphasizes the need to actually speak to the power, to overturn oppressive powers, to be involved in something that's very confrontational. And I think that's the tension that we're hitting on in this moment, because when I look at Donald Trump, and this probably is an overstatement, but a lot of people are making it. People are seeing a dictator that we've seen in history past. We're seeing Adolf Hitler. We're seeing.
You're naive if you don't see that.
Yeah.
That's the naivete we have to worry about. But go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. And so we make that judgment, and this is where I've been like really stuck. Is I see this happening, and I feel like I want to learn from history, and I'm not going to be silent on this man. I'm going to be one who's calling this out and raising this up. And yet, I feel this tension of wanting to say, I am seeing Trump in some way as a scapegoat by realizing all of the problems that he, in himself, is kind of incarnating, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And so, what do you do there?
I admit that it takes maturity. I don't think, frankly, an emotionally immature person can do it. You know, even Bill Wilson in his 12-step work said that someone should not consider themselves in recovery until they've achieved emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety could be another name for maturity, where you don't do knee-jerk, egocentric, self-referential reactions to everything. Now, that's one of the very criteria by which you can see, forgive us, Donald Trump's immaturity. His responses are consistently narcissistic. Consistently. All right? Now, you better have the wisdom, and this is what Jesus meant, I think, by being wise as serpent and gentle as doves, is putting together the two sides you're talking about. The liberation theology strain, which I teach, by the way, would be probably the wise as serpents. You know, let's call a spade a spade. Let's call evil evil. Let's recognize evil structures, oppressive systems that are destroying and hurting people and excluding people. And that's, of course, largely only a product of the last 40 years or so. It took us this long to recognize how it isn't just individual evil we're dealing with, but structural evil. Now, the contemplative side, and some people fall too far on that end, some fall on the other end, but the contemplative side wants to immediately see everything in its wholeness, in its, God is allowing it, so I should allow it, you see. And that's what I call starting with yes, right? And I come down on the contemplative side. And that's the meaning of my morning prayer. is I have to stay in prayer till I can come to a foundational yes to the day that is in front of me, even Donald Trump, right? Now, once I know that my heart is at peace and not hateful, angry, oppositional, that I've attained to some degree the contemplative mind, I actually have greater freedom to go back in and work for social change. And here's why. It's no longer tied to my ego being right and me winning. And I'm a righteous person, forgive me, I'm ashamed of it. But I want to be right, you know. A lot of us clergy do, I'm afraid, I'm sorry to say. And until I exorcise that demon, I don't think I can preach the gospel. I will just preach liberal theology in my name. You understand? Yeah. It's not the same. Yeah.
I think you hit on something really important there. In that, I think our judgment on this situation, when we enter into the current political climate and we're looking at the two candidates, when we're moving from that place of fear, when we're moving from that place of hatred, and some of that emotion is justified for people, especially immigrants and things that would look at Donald Trump and see their oppressor, and yet to move out of that space is probably where the unhealth and the uncenteredness comes from. Whereas when we can move from the space of the foundational yes, the union with God, the trust that in God everything's going to be okay, everything has a space, then we can move and make judgments from a conscious place, from a
conscious, free, and even loving place. Even though you might have to say what Jesus said, he's a whited sepulchre. You understand? Yeah. That isn't scapegoating if it's conscious and prayerful and true.
Right.
Scapegoating people are highly unconscious people, and I think that's what's discouraged us about this whole campaign. There's been non-stop scapegoating from, I'm sure, both sides, but strikingly from one side.
Yeah. So, moving forward.
Take me wherever you want.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there.
I know. I don't want to make it overly simplified, but because it takes maturity to even feel this way, think this way, speak this way. Yeah.
Now, let's go there, and this might be a nerve for some people, but what do you say? Because I honestly believe we have to also grasp the fact that there are people that are supporting Donald Trump, and there are people that are supporting Hillary Clinton, and both of them are not doing it from a place of ignorance. So how then do we maintain unity or even move forward as a people? Because get rid of the moral questions around the candidates. The point is, in every election season, we as a nation enter this divided place where we're pitted against each other.
Every election.
And every speech at both conventions is about the other side being wrong.
That's right.
In national consciousness, that might be too big of a level to go from, but is there a way to heal the divide in our national consciousness to actually move forward and do something productive once we've shot each other so many times and destroyed each other?
Well, of course, I have to say there has to be, but I do know this path is a narrow one that is not easily found. And I think this is why Jesus, he really doesn't have a real clear, obvious socio-political agenda, except his identification with the powerless, which ends up being a very strong socio-political agenda. But he doesn't fight the powers that be directly. He just reveals where it's going to lead in his crucifixion on the cross. And I think the reason he does that is political discourse is inherently and proudly dualistic. It needs to be dualistic. You don't sound like you believe in your position or you're strong if you don't talk with great firmness. And so you can't expect a high degree of truth. You really can't. Now, I'm not going to name other names, but I have been impressed by some talks I've heard that appear to be what I'd call third way thinking. You understand? That are trying to get us beyond tribalism and exclusionary thinking. So even the talks like, I'll say it, Obama gave yesterday. Wow, if I just analyze that, not caring about political party, political position, I could find you the words and the phrases that are third way thinking.
Sure.
Yeah. You got to say that. I'm not saying this represents the whole Democratic Party. I don't think it does.
Right.
You know, but that this can happen in our lifetime. That a public figure can talk to that degree after 8 years of being vilified and hated. Most of us, let's be honest, would be very cynical, very angry, and very bitter. And we want to attack back. I didn't hear a word of that.
Sure.
That's gospel. That's amazing. Yeah. And that's the fruit of the cross, it seems to me, that revealed to us not to mirror our oppressors.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's just for my vindication. That's why I had to break my social media fast last night to watch Obama's speech. But I was literally the same thing. I was very impressed by some of the heightened consciousness that you would hear from him.
I wanted to weep. I said, this is being said on national television. Or even Michelle, the few days before, when they go lower, we go higher. I mean, that's something Martin Luther King would say.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. I think the last strong turn we'll take in this is, I've been very interested in kind of this talk of, Phyllis Tickle talked about as the age of the spirit, that people that are involved in integral theory talk about as the second axial age. I know you've written and talked about this. It seems to me that something really momentous is happening when we look at Brexit and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and Black Lives Matter and the LGBT rights movement and women's rights and all of this. There's this decentralization of the white, straight, cisgender, male, European power, and this shift to the marginalized having influence and power. And I don't know, sitting back and trying to look at this as deeply as I can, it really seems that we're finally on this point that many people have been talking about, maybe prophesied about. Is it Joachim who talked about the age of the spirit way back?
Oh, yes. Joachim of Fiore, yeah.
And so,
he thought we Franciscans were the new age. He was wrong, I think, but he thought that.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a possibility.
Well,
but
you're a little piece of it. Yeah.
Do you think that, and this is probably an unfair question, do you think we're on the actual precipice finally, or are we being just like Joachim was back in his day, thinking that it was right around, that we're coming into this age of the kingdom? Maybe kingdom strong.
Yeah. You know, I've been using the term second axial consciousness. That's from Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher, where he said first axial consciousness was between 200 and 500 BC, when the first globalization of thought and ideas reveals itself in China, in the Hebrew prophets, in the Greek philosophers. It's all in that same 500-year period. There's a huge convergence. Now, just on that level, the convergence that's taking place now, by reason of the internet, by reason of the globalization of knowledge. You know, I grew up never having met a Hindu until I went to India 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. You can't do that anymore. You can't be naively ignorant and say all these people are pagans and stupid. Just go there, and you'll be put to shame that some of them love much more than we do, which is very humiliating for a Christian to have to recognize. But that kind of globalization of knowledge, of experience, easy travel, I think merits the phrase second axial consciousness. I'm not going to say we're the denouement of history, but there is a huge convergence that is undeniable. And when you mention things like Brexit and so forth, whenever you have consciousness moving forward, you have an equally strong pushback to pull us back into tribalism, to pull us back into culture wars, to pull us back into ethnicity instead of Catholicity. Now, you know how I'm using the word Catholic. Universality. And as a Roman Catholic, which is sort of an oxymoron, but I do want to focus in that word Catholic was already self-chosen by the people of God in the 2nd and 3rd century They saw that what Christ had given them had a global purpose, meaning, trajectory, and direction. And they called themselves the Catholic people. That's that's why it's still in the creed. But the word means universal. It doesn't mean Roman Catholic.
Yeah. Which I think as Protestants need to hear that some
yes, they
people,
don't know it.
Yeah. There's so much done out there.
I know. I'm saying too much. Forgive me.
It's good. I think what we'll do is just to end it. There's a couple questions I see
Okay.
popped up, and I'll go.
You ask the questions.
I'll read.
Hope I can answer.
Let's see what we have here. Greg Dill says, Father Rohr, can you give an example from the Gospels where Jesus demonstrated a non-dualistic view?
Oh, where do I start? When he says, what you do to the neighbor, you do to Christ. You see, that's non-dual thinking. When he says, my Father's sun shines on the good and the bad. His rain falls on the just and the unjust. That's non-dual thinking. When he says in John 10:30, I and the Father are one. That's non-dual thinking. Once you get the idea, you're going to see that it's everywhere. Most especially, however, in John's Gospel. But remember, non-dual does not exclude dual. I've got to say it one more time. Because there's dualistic passages, and unfortunately, people who are trapped at that level of consciousness, that's all they hear. And they focus in on that, and they never see him following it up with, forgive your neighbor 70 times 7. You know, the infinite nature of divine mercy, the infinite nature of divine love, which cannot be understood except with non-dual mind. You can't understand any notion of infinity. You always divide the field. The dualistic mind always divides the field into what it likes and what it doesn't like. To accept it all, which is what Jesus is doing on the cross, is to accept what I like and what I don't like too. And not excluding what I don't like.
Yeah. I'll bait you on that one really quickly, because you have a new book on the Trinity coming out.
Yes.
And the fascinating idea that you've brought up, and some others have brought up recently as well, is this notion that the Trinity pulls us out of non-dualism. That Christianity at its core, with that conception of God, is non-dualistic. Can you
just a little bit on it? I would go so far as to say the doctrine of the Trinity, which took us 3 centuries to develop.
Sure.
The word is not in the Bible, and yet no Orthodox Christian would think of denying the doctrine of the Trinity. Right? Because the dualistic minds of the ordinary person, 1, 3, 3, 1, it became a mathematical conundrum. But once you let grace dip you in to this Trinitarian nature of God, I would say the doctrine of the Trinity is made to order to defeat your dualistic mind, because you cannot resolve your either-or question. 1, 3, 3, 1. It's both. Now, you all agree with that if you're an Orthodox Christian. God is both one and yet 3, and they don't cancel one another out. That's non-dual thinking. You just attain a much higher ability to live with paradox. And by the way, if you can't live with paradox, I don't think you can love anybody. You can't love. You can't love with a dualistic mind, because you will always have evidence that proves even your wife, your husband, your children, your neighborhood, your pastor. You will always have evidence why they're not perfectly lovable.
Does that mean that everybody at some level touches on non-dualism in their lifetime?
Well, I think they do. And that's why I think marriage is the natural path of transformation. Faithfulness to one person.
Right.
Because faithfulness to one person forces you to naturally see their weaknesses and their dark side, and yet by some wonderful grace you choose to love them anyway. So it's only inside of love that you can be a contemplative at all.
Sure.
It's
okay, we'll do one last, and then
one
we'll
last.
be
Okay.
I promise one last. Sorry. Let's see what we have.
It's okay.
My brother joined. Hello, Michael.
Your blood brother?
Yeah.
Oh. He lives in Colorado too?
No, he's from Maryland.
Maryland. Oh.
So the only other major comment, and you've talked about it a little bit, but we'll just I'll throw it at you and see if you have anything more to say, is somebody said there's a big difference between scapegoating and truth-telling,
Yeah.
and I think that you're engaged in the latter in regards to how we're talking about Donald Trump.
Oh, I hope so. Well, thank you for hearing it that way, because that's my desire and intention. And this is real important, so I'm glad Brandan is asking me these questions, because a lot of Christians are gentle as doves, but not wise as serpents. They really are. And they get naive about people who are abusing power and oppressing the poor and oppressing anybody. Which is why we haven't had a very good social ethic, really. Almost an inability to recognize corporate evil or institutionalized sin. So this is another major sign of this convergence. That even words like that, corporate sin or institutional evil, really only emerged about 30 years ago. Yeah. We couldn't even think that way. All sin was applied to the individual.
Right.
You're a sinful man. Yeah. But we had no ability to recognize, well, part of the reason, forgive me, Brandan is sinful, is he lives in what the Bible called the world, the system which is entirely violent, self-serving, deceitful, and we've got to just be honest about that. All systems organize themselves to protect themselves. So, and you can't let systems off the hook and just convince individuals that they're bad.
And I think that's what the Apostle Paul was touching on.
Oh, Paul gets this.
Yeah, he writes, one of my favorite passages for non-scapegoating thinking is, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the unseen realm. Yeah. And so there's this real sense that though a person might be doing evil in and of themselves, I think Donald Trump is doing evil in some of the things he says. I think other people are doing evil.
Objectively speaking, that's true.
But what they're also doing is manifesting an unseen power that goes far beyond them, and that we can not elect Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean the problems that are embodied in him go away. We need to address the unseen power.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to show, I hope I'm speaking for you when I say this, I think both of us would agree that the other candidate, Hillary, is very much aligned with power and money. Right. There's none of us can sit on a pedestal of perfection or superiority. So we want to both say that, so you don't say we're dualistic. You know, but you finally, politics is the art of the possible. And you've got to deal with, in a sinful world, what can yield the greatest good. That's called discernment. Huh? And Protestants in general haven't been very good at that. They weren't taught discernment, the subtle nature of evil and the subtle nature of good too. It was always just the Bible says and that makes it right, the Bible says and that makes it wrong. That doesn't get you to very subtle perception, or what I called before emotional sobriety. Now believe me, there's plenty of Catholics that way too. But at least in the religious orders, like I'm a Franciscan, we were taught much better than that. And that's a pure gift that I was given.
Well, thank you all for taking time to stop by and watch this today, and those who will watch this in the future. I hope that this explanation and this exploration of these topics around the election kind of help us in this moment, because I think all of our hope is not that we would continue in this divided, against one another state that we find ourselves in, but we'd move into a place where true healing and reconciliation can come for everyone in our nation, even those we disagree with the most. And so thank you for helping us see that.
Thank you, Brandan.
And
thank you.
Yeah.
God bless you all.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's see what we can do.